Welcome to the Patrick Coffin Show. My name is Patrick Coffin. We're going to have a fantastic conversation. You'll want to buckle up and sit tight. John Waters is my guest. He's an Irish writer and playwright and chronicler of history. But I do want to mention one thing, and that is mypillow.com. I'm proud to represent in an affiliate way mypillow.com, American-made products. It's not just pillows, which are fantastic. It's doggy beds, it's sheets, it's slippers, it's bathrobes, all there. And my name, Patrick, at the coupon checkout area gets you the 66 point something percent ridiculously advantageous Patrick Coffin Show listener discount. So go to mypillow.com. Patrick's the subtitle. Patrick is the coupon code at the checkout. And believe me, people have circled back and thanked me. No one has ever said, I bought the products and they suck. Never. So mypillow.com, Patrick's the code. You're welcome in advance. It seems when we look in the rear view of our own lives and what we've undergone since about, March 2020 with the international pandemic, that the truth of which is starting to spill out. It seems all like a dystopian dream. Well, John Waters, my guest this episode, has taken the time to write down his ruminations and reflections, and he's put a lot of dots together about this global, what's the best way to put it, coordinated attempt, rather successful, at crowd control and propaganda and brainwashing using the very best techniques. And we're going to talk about whether or not there's a 2.0 planned, what lessons can we learn. We'll talk about mimesis and the power of mass media to keep saying the same thing from so many different angles. John has put together his Substack reflections and analysis in a new book, which is called The Abolition of Reality, a first draft of the end of history. John Waters joins me from beautiful Dublin. John, I also want to mention, was part of the Truth Over Fear Summit that got me in lots of hot water. Reminded me of the quote by the great Chesterton, who said, "The best way to stay clean is to remain in hot water." I love that. With your name, Waters, there's something maybe providential about that. Have you heard that the Latin phrase, John, nomen est omen? It means names are destiny.
Yeah. Oh,
People's names are often wrapped up strangely or ironically in what befalls them.
yeah. I'm not sure about my name though, because I learned to swim, but just about, and then I stopped because I didn't like it. So
Hmm.
water and I don't really work so well together. Certainly not with me in it. So
Well, maybe it's something supernatural. Maybe it's the waters of the Red Sea that killed the evil Egyptians and spared God's people, and of course the waters of baptism. But we could go on and on about name analysis. I'm not going to. I promise not to call you a journalist. I know we've talked about the what has happened to what used to be called journalism, but you are an observer of events. You wrote for a long time in Irish newspapers, Irish Times. You sort of the, I don't know, but official historian of the rock band U2. So you've seen a great arc of what's happened to Western civilization from the Irish perspective. Were you always a natural born writer, John? Did you always like to observe and write down the things you were seeing and feeling?
well, I always wanted to be a writer. I can't say I always was one. It didn't come easy. I had to work very hard at it, and I only got there almost by the skin of my teeth. Because I didn't really have any way in. I didn't have any qualifications, which would have allowed me into journalism in that sense. You know, I got it. I used to write articles and send them off to Hot Press, which was the Irish rock and roll magazine. And the first one actually miraculously was published, which made me think I'm away, and I was carrying it around in my jacket for months, like taking it out more and more dog-eared. Couldn't believe
Mhm.
that actually. But it took me another few years to actually get another one in, and then another couple of years. And then finally they wrote to me and said, listen, you've been sending in a lot of stuff, and some of it's pretty good. And so would you like to come and work for us? And I said, let me think about it. Okay. And that was kind of like how I got in, and I was blessed really. It was like what I'd always wanted to be was a writer. But I worked very hard at it. I had to kind of develop I don't think I had some natural ability. There's no doubt about that. As a child, I was good at writing what we used to call compositions, but there's more
Mhm.
than that. And as I found out as I went along, but yeah, and also I suppose the thing I am most interested in is trying to find words for things which are almost just kind of out of the corner of your eye, the thing in a feeling sense, an emotional sense,
Mhm.
which there have been
Mhm.
a lot of in the last 5 years. Things that don't make sense, can't be true, are unbelievable, and yet they're happening. And they make you feel these strange emotions that you've never felt before. Just because you're being offended metaphysically at every turn in the context of your sense of natural justice, for example, or the sense of reason that we were told that at the age of 7 when we were in school that you reached the age of reason. And
Mhm.
I've been wondering for the last 5.5 years what happened to that. It's because is this no longer a thing? And there's so many things that are I think about and talk about in the book, which kind of we took to be axiomatic all our lives. And then one morning we woke up and we kind of, over the course of a few days, we kind of got this distinct impression that all these things had been bent, that they were all, gone. Nobody wanted to do these things anymore. Like, for example, nobody wanted to be kind to people except in a certain kind of ideological sense but they were saying they wanted to treat people properly and save their lives, and yet they were putting them in hospitals and locking them in and refusing to let their loved ones come and see them, and causing them enormous stress, which actually then could kill them in many instances, and
Mhm.
so on. So these kind of things, it wasn't the world I was born into. It wasn't the world I grew up in. For all the flaws of society or times or whatever, it was nothing that we had gone through, to my mind, had been anything like this in the context of the kind of gaslighting that was going on from the political establishments, the contempt that they were showing to towards their own people, the total indifference for principles, for conventions, for charters, for constitutions, everything out the window, and you know and then nobody seemed to really notice, apart from myself and one or two others. Like everybody else was kind of thought, "Oh, yes, it's fine. This is fine. Yeah, yeah. Oh no, this is quite natural that you would do this. Yeah, yeah. Because you should. I had a cold last night. I had that cold last week, and I wouldn't like to get it again. Well, yeah, but
Mhm.
I had a flu the week before last, and I wouldn't like to get it again either by this moment. But I wouldn't ring up the government and say, "Could you close the world down because I've got a
Yeah.
cold?"
Mhm.
You know.
Yeah. You
Well,
look at the footage now, for people who forget, because it's easy to rabbit hole because they never bring it up again. There's certain things the press is curiously incurious about. That's the beginning of a long list. Think of Stephen Paddock. The name probably doesn't ring a bell. He's the guy who apparently, so the story goes, opened fire from the Mandalay Bay Hotel upon a concert in Las Vegas. Well, that story's down the rabbit hole already. Thomas Crooks from the Butler, PA event involving President Trump. Who's he? No one seems to care. There's a journalistic incuriosity about certain things. But I remember in California, the almost like the Tiananmen Square man. Remember that famous photo of the guy who was standing in front of a tank in Tiananmen Square in 1989 with the garbage bags, the grocery bags. There was a guy on a stand-up surfboard, paddleboard, being arrested 1,000 yards off the coast in, I want to say, March or April 2020.
yeah.
That's an iconic symbol of the overreach at all levels of government, all across the media. So in a matter of days or weeks, every TV executive, every teleprompter script, every producer, every editor, every online personality was saying the same thing, speaking off the same sheet of music. How do people not notice? I don't know why I did at the time. I'm not Einstein, but I saw that we were being lied to on a massive scale.
Yes.
You have like school kids in these almost Maxwell Smart people who remember the show Get Smart, remember the cone of silence. You have kids playing the trumpet inside these tubes. Now you pointed out something that happened in Ireland. These oversized balls
Yeah.
that people are supposed to sort of walk around and describe those. And did they name them?
These were specifically for going to rock concerts, I think. So you would go in, presumably into the arena, then you would have some kind of a pump that would blow up this thing around you, this big bubble, and you would sort of shuffle around and bump into other bubbles all night, maybe even dance with another bubble. I don't know.
Yeah.
But this was, and everybody watched this with completely deadpan expressions and sort of, that's a very interesting, that's a really good idea, I think. I'd like to try that.
Mhm.
Like, this is the thing I feel, Patrick, and as I was saying to you when we spoke yesterday, the amazing thing for me is that the thought like that, did this actually happen? I actually, there's a part of me that doesn't really believe now, 5.5 years on, that this could possibly have happened in the world that we had grown up in.
Mhm.
Because we had all these guards against these things legally and so on, but also we were too clever, we thought, to allow such a thing to happen. We were too intelligent, we were too advanced, too progressive, too enlightened to allow 1984 to happen 40 years on.
Yep.
When it hadn't happened, when it was supposed to have happened in the imagination of George Orwell, and we kind of waited another, whatever, 36 years, and there it was. And nobody seemed to think that this was in any way ironic. Nobody seemed to think that, we should respond to this in the same way as we had responded to the plot in George Orwell's novel, which was with horror. When we saw what happened to Winston Smith and Julia, his girlfriend, and so on, we followed that. We were shuddering with horror at the idea that this could possibly happen. And here it was. And nobody said,
Let me throw this at you. I don't know. I don't want to get over my skis, and I love evidence. I try to encourage people to live their life. But it occurred to me, since 1984 is so prescient, so strangely accurate about what was coming down the pike, that I believe there exists the possibility that George Orwell, not his real name, I guess he was embedded in the MI6 BBC machine at the time, during and after World War II, that maybe Orwell was part of the planning committee, and that's why his novel is so prescient and so miraculously prophetic.
well,
Maybe this is kind of
yeah, well,
blueprint
there
planning.
is there is something there. I don't know exactly whether he was, using his inside knowledge. He was a member of the Fabian Society, which was up to his neck in all of this
Mhm.
kind of planning. And so he would have been aware of all this stuff. Now, whether he did that for research purposes and in order to warn people, which is a possibility. I think when you read the rest of his work, read his essays, like what you get out of the essays is a very strong ethical sense and a sense of natural justice. And I
Mhm.
do think, therefore, that 1984 rings true in the context of the feelings that you feel, the rage that you feel as the reader, that this could possibly be happening in this fictional world. And
Mhm.
let's not forget. But I would say that however he got the information. I remember, like, Huxley, some years
Mhm.
earlier, I think it was something like near 20 years earlier, had written Brave New World, and he definitely had access to all of this kind of stuff through his brother Julian, who was a scientist and who was involved in the foundation of UNESCO and involved in the UN and all those things. So they were well aware of the kinds of things that were happening. And I don't, and of course, Orwell had been a pupil of Huxley. I forget the subject. I think it was French, or I don't. I can't remember exactly what he
Hmm.
lectured in. But
Know that.
yeah, so there was a connection between those two, and I think there's a chapter in the book where I talk about that, and I talk about the correspondence that happened between them about this, and so on. But you see, to go back to your point about the way that the whole world seemed to, like, you see, I used to be a journalist, bless the mark, and if you ask a layperson what is journalism for, what does it do, they'll
Mhm.
probably give you a kind of a fudgy kind of answer, a fuzzy kind of answer about, like, well, they give you information and they report what happened yesterday or whatever. But in fact, if you ask a journalist, by and large, if you ask a journalist, certainly a good journalist, what does journalism do? They will all give you the same answer. And that is, journalism holds power to account. That's its function. And it's actually its
Mhm.
only function fundamentally. The rest is just simply the mechanisms by which it does that. That it ventilates issues in public. It it alerts people. It indicts abuses. It has no other
Mhm.
function in a society, and certainly no other function in a democratic society. And yet, from the beginning of this saga, 5.5 years ago, virtually, I would say, if not, you could even drop the virtually, certainly in the mainstream, all journalists, basically, pretty much, surrendered, abdicated that position, that function, and essentially became paid servants of their governments in,
Stenographers of the tyrants.
in the business of lying on a daily basis to their readers and to their listeners and to their viewers. That's what happened to journalism. And there's nothing else that can be said about it. And there's no excuse for it. And it is utterly shameful beyond imagination. It is the most horrible, I would say it's the greatest betrayal it has ever been committed by any profession as a profession in the world. Because remember, it's not a trivial thing. It's not simply that, oh, well, the events are being somewhat distorted in the reportage. No. None of these other things could have happened if the press had remained honest. That's the point. That's their job. And if they had done it, we would have had a watchdog to bark, to warn us. The people would have known that there was something. And every day the people's attention would be drawn to the things that we draw their attention to. But unfortunately, our audiences are not total, are not exhaustive. And so this is the crime. And this is, in a certain sense, as I say, the central crime. Of course, it's been orchestrated by so-called elite power and wealth mongers up there somewhere in the gods, so to speak. But they couldn't function if journalism had not agreed to be corruptible.
Yeah. We talked. You mentioned this in the book, the rise of AI technology and the storyteller's ability to craft narratives that can neither be confirmed nor denied because they rest on presentations, let's say video, that are no longer trustworthy. Now, I'd love to complain about the internet, but the internet also allows you and I to talk right now. And during the COVID period, this is why I arranged this Truth Over Fear Summit, 2 of them, and I was glad that you participated. And that is, it allowed people to see that they're not living their life in a silo. Did you get more support from international journalists and writers and reporters who saw things as they are more than you did in your native Ireland? Because I've heard this a lot, that prophet's not accepted in his own land, but people connected with folks thousands of miles away, they never would have met except you fight this common monster, so to speak. Make sense?
That's right. Yeah, that's right. I mean, that's a very interesting point. I mean, when I was a mainstream journalist, I was pretty much exclusively writing for Ireland. I did write the odd article in newspapers like The Guardian or The Observer or whatever, occasionally. But by and large, it was Ireland, and that was my theme, and it was my subject, and it was my hinterland. It was my audience. But in the last 5.5 years, my audience is global in a sense, and I make a lot of connections with people all over the world, and that can deceive you in a way because particularly in a place like Ireland, which is so small that and so monolithic in the context of its culture and its instruments of culture, that they can control it really, like in a a grip like vice or whatever that is, the result is that we live in Ireland particularly, and I think this is true of to some extent of every country. We live in a pseudo reality where events are normalized, where people talk about the talking points are not what's actually happening in the world, really. The things that you would immediately say, well, what are the first 5 things you would say? Well, what they are, they're excess deaths and, the constant rumbling about new vaccines and new viruses and so on, despite everything that is known about the last episode and so on. And so we're in the middle of this kind of completely fabricated reality. We're in Ireland now. At the moment, we have a presidential election, and it's a farce. It's a clown show because the government is making sure that nobody who might remotely come near them in terms of questioning or asking, what they're doing, what's this about. Not that there are very many of those, in the race or wanting to get into the race because they know what would happen. And the result is that people are talking about this thing as if it was like a football match or but it has no relevance to their lives in the context of either their spiritual lives, because this is a spiritual attack. I mean, you said earlier about one of the descriptions, you may give various descriptions of what it is, but I think centrally what it is, and you know this too, is that it's been a spirit, probably the greatest spiritual attack on the human race that's ever
Hmm.
been, on the human race qua human race. There are many
Yeah.
attacks on different countries, different peoples, but this is basically a blanket attack on the whole world in an attempt to basically capture its resources, and imprison its human quotient. And this is really something that should be on the news, in the news. Like, should be on the newspapers, and it's not.
And this is the first time for any let's just for the sake of argument say that the phenomena was an actual pandemic and it was a terrible, dangerous, nasty disease, and you don't want to be a grandma and you should go along with it to get along with the grand narrative. In any previous existence, example of that, you would not have had Catholic Church cooperation at the highest level. And this has been a terrible scandal for millions and millions of Catholics, that Francis from Buenos Aires not only accepted it, but became a salesman for Moderna and Pfizer
Yes.
to his dying day, saying it would be an act of love. I
Yeah.
remember the first Good Friday photos. It was raining, uncharacteristically raining on Good Friday in Rome, and there he is in his white, overseeing an empty St. Peter's Square. And Catholics, journalists on this side of the pond say, "Oh, isn't this moving?" No, it's evil.
Mm.
It's ridiculous.
Yes.
Why lock out 1 billion Catholics from the sacraments when these same Catholics can go to a grocery store and handle fruits and vegetables that have been touched all day long by strangers? No one bats an eye. But you
Yeah.
need hazmat gear and a full, the bag you were talking about. You couldn't receive Holy Communion unless you were squirted up the wazoo, if you could even get to Mass, because the whole thing looked like a crime scene with the taping off every second pew,
Yes.
all endorsed by the bishops. So
Uh,
put you on the spot a little bit as a Catholic to a Catholic. What was your reaction to the hierarchy response to COVID?
well, and by the way, not by the way, but very much centrally, the abortion clinics were open, and they knew.
Say that again. They what?
They didn't say it. They didn't say what's going on. You're leaving the clinics open, and you're closing. You want us
Oh,
to.
right. Your clinic stayed open. Right. Hmm.
Yeah. So here we go. Oh, I can't get past this, Patrick. I really can't. I have huge difficulty now with the church because of this. Because back in the Black time of the Black Death, I've
Hmm.
been reading about it, and what happened there was that the priests went out everywhere, searching for people who might be ill, in order
Hmm.
to give them the last rites and the sacraments to
Yes.
save their souls. That was their priority, which would seem to me to be entirely in keeping with the Gospels, where Christ
Hmm.
embraced the lepers. He didn't wear a
Right.
face mask. He didn't wear a face mask while he was embracing the lepers.
That's a very good analogy.
And yet we were locked out. Everybody was locked out. People at the most dire, people who were genuinely scared, people who were scared to lying in beds alone, their loved ones, if they were lucky, outside a window, waving to them. Like, is there anything? Can anybody tell me how these priests and these priests and cardinals and bishops can look themselves in the mirror, look at themselves after this? How can they preach? Tell me, how is this Christian? I don't know. And so I have personally, Patrick, I have a huge difficulty. I stopped going to mass then. I just stopped. I
You
can't,
did.
I can't look at them. I can't get past it. I don't, there's no way back other than that they get on their knees and apologize to the people of the Catholic people of the world. That to me, and that's not going to happen, because it seems to me that the new Pope is pretty much in the same vein as the last one. And that's not good news.
The jury's not out on a lot of elements of Leo the 14th. That's another 9 shows for another day, I suppose. Maybe providentially, this abdication on the part of the Catholic hierarchy was an important, and pardon the metaphor, mask drop about their own lack of faith in the teaching of Christ in the church. If you believe that a sinner who's validly ordained called a priest can confect the Eucharist and make bread into the body and blood, soul, and divinity of the second person of the eternal Trinity, if you believe that, then you're going to do flips and twists to go there to receive him and to bring him to people who are lonely, aged in hospitals and so on. The fact that it wasn't done, to me, is an indicator of this massive apostasy that has come upon the church in the last 60 years.
Well, I think that you're onto the core of it there, because it isn't, you see, when you see priests using hand sanitizer on the altar while they're holding the chalice, while they're dealing with the
Uh-huh.
Blessed Sacrament, that's not naivety. That's not stupidity. That's part of the plan. That's part of the propaganda campaign and their participation in it. Otherwise, we have to conclude that these guys who studied theology for years didn't learn anything when they were in the seminary.
You're laying your hand on something important, and it goes back to what you said earlier about this being a spiritual attack. If you see a priest or what they call the extraordinary ministers of Holy Communion, which is now a whole army of, to me, redundant lay people that should just be in the pew praying. There's no rush. Why do we have to have this army of people distributing Holy Communion? That doesn't make a lot of sense to me. But when they're using hand sanitizer and when the priest is playing along with this, what's the message to the faithful in the pew? That you need to be protected from Jesus.
What do you
That's the devil.
say?
That's the whisper of the enemy.
What-
What's the de facto net message to the people in the pews when the priest who is distributing Holy Communion, or the army of lay people called extraordinary ministers of Holy Communion, when they're squirting their hands up? The message is you need to be protected from Jesus, that the Lord's presence and power in the Eucharist can't defeat. It's too big. It's too big of a foe. So we need to
Yeah.
use these little human, ridiculous, almost prophylactics against the Savior. That's the demonic attack, is the
Yeah.
message that it sends about the complete inefficacy of the Eucharist, that it's not really real presence. It's like a nice symbol. And you see this now with Catholics who think that opening their laptop up and pressing play, watching Mass, is the same as being in the room receiving the sacrament.
Yeah.
Pretty successful diabolical strategy, if you ask me.
Well, exactly right. I mean, this is the point, Patrick. The church is not supposed to be of the world. Its message and what it brings to the world is not of the world. And for the church to do what it did has placed it centrally in, not alone in the world, but in the power structure of the world. It has become a century of the power of the force, of coercive force, because this was not, you see, ultimately, to go back to your point about if this had been a serious pandemic, blah, blah, blah. Well, what happened before when there was a flu going around in the wintertime?
Mm-hmm.
Well, people who got it took to their beds. They didn't need to be told on the TV, go to bed, because they felt sick. They felt unwell. I know it's happened to me numerous times. You can't wait to get home that day and lie down and take drinks and hope
Mm-hmm.
that you sleep it off in 3 or 4 days, which you do generally.
Mm-hmm.
That's what happens. You don't need the government to tell you anything about it. The government needn't know you're ill. And in most cases, they never did. They weren't, the prime minister, the minister for health did never call to my house when I had the flu, asking me if I was okay. Did I need anything?
Mm-hmm.
Why? So it was obvious that what was going on was not about our health at all. And I don't think that I, in all modesty, but I'm more intelligent than the average priest or bishop. I wouldn't claim to be. Never mind the Pope. These guys knew that what they were doing was completely fraudulent. This is my point. It
Mm-hmm.
wasn't. It wasn't that they were duped. It wasn't that they fell for it. They knew perfectly well that they were exercising a ritual which was not the Mass. It was a different ritual that was burying the Mass, burying the entire meaning of the Eucharist under this propaganda. And this
Mm-hmm.
is the most shameful thing that has ever happened in the Catholic Church.
Don't underestimate the power of mimesis. Have you read much about René Girard in Mimesis, also known as mimetic desire? It's
Yes.
basically, the premise is that people are made to love what others love and hate what they hate.
Yeah.
We love scapegoating. We love the tribe. We love tribal thinking. We love trends. The fact that people would be willing to bring a pup tent to the corner of Hollywood and Vine and sleep for 2 nights for a movie opener when the movie's going to go, straight to streaming in a couple of days is an example of this. And people are susceptible to mass propaganda.
Yes.
They just are. And the more you think you're immune to it, the more of a patsy you are to it. We don't want to stand up and stand out. We don't want to go against the crowd. Do you know about the Ash experiments? This is
Yes,
exactly what you mean,
I
right?
do.
So briefly, people in the early '60s, I think, Solomon Ash was a psychiatrist, and he wanted to test groupthink. So you have people who are being examined. They think they're part of the experiment, but they're actually the mark of the experiment. And there's one line on the left side of the page and 3 lines on the right side, and only one on the right side is the exact same length, and the other 2 of the 3 are obviously shorter or longer. And this high proportion, ridiculously high proportion of people, when faced with groupthink, saying, "Oh no, I think that's actually the line that's the same length." People stopped believing their own lying eyes. They were willing to go along to get along because they buckled to the groupthink. It's human nature.
It's a very interesting thing, Patrick, and there's a couple of chapters in my book about this, maybe 3 actually, and because it's groupthink is an amazing concept.
Mhm.
But I recently had an experience. I won't say where, but in a particular context where I was with a group of people who were not, particularly au fait with the things that we're talking about now. Let's say in general, and
Mhm.
certainly it wasn't on the agenda to speak about these things in that context, right? And so the conversations were going different ways. But I became aware in myself of an increasing pressure in me, in a certain sense, based on the fact that I have been speaking out about these things. And I felt this in other contexts before. And the word shame is possibly too strong, but it's not very much too strong for what you feel when you are in a situation like that and you don't share the views of everybody because you want to in this group. You want to be
Mhm.
part of the group. And to feel that you're somehow ostracized or you have ostracized yourself from it by virtue of saying certain things or thinking certain things makes you feel, oh, in a certain sense, I wish I kept my mouth shut. I don't mean that literally, but you know what I mean. It's like that. You do feel a degree of shame. It's like the idea of being tarred and feathered. You know,
Mhm.
you may be completely innocent. You're still going to feel shame if you're tarred and feathered,
Yeah.
even though you're totally innocent. And so in a certain sense, it struck me that I had, in a certain sense, been protected for the last 2 years by virtue of being isolated. In a sense, those who cancelled me had done me a favor in advance for this period because by being isolated, I wasn't under that pressure on a daily basis, which I would have been if I had to go to a workplace or into a college or into whatever school and be with other people and share the same kind of menu of topics and not get into arguments, which is kind of lethal in the culture which they have created. This is interesting, you see.
Mhm.
This
Mhm.
COVID came after woke. Now, woke started back about 2012, 13, and really whipped up to about to a kind of a crescendo around 2015. And then it's been going like that ever since. And woke created a kind of what I call a mutism in the populations of the world, particularly in the West, I think, whereby people became afraid because of being attacked by the guys or feminists or people or whatever. They learned to keep their mouth shut. They learned not to get into arguments. They learned that if you're thinking bad thoughts, then don't say anything. And so we are this culture is, and particularly in Ireland, and I find Ireland used to be the most argumentative, the most garrulous, conversational country on earth. It's not now. It's being
Mhm.
destroyed. At that level, it's being destroyed. People are afraid to speak in public, even sotto voce. They're so constantly looking around them, and worrying, is somebody listening? And people are listening. I mean, I've heard of cases like people being attacked in public houses for when somebody who's overheard them saying something. whether it's a
Hmm.
mass migration or something like that, suddenly they
Yep.
find themselves called racist in the middle of a bar. You know,
Waving a flag will get you in jail.
yeah, yeah.
How do we get here?
Oh boy, you see, this is the thing. We, myself another former journalist, Jim O'Doherty, took a legal action, a constitutional action in Ireland on foot of all this stuff. Um, and then we got the runaround for 2.5 years, and eventually our case was kicked out. They told us that our case had no merit, but if it had no merit, the first judge on the first day could have said so, but he
Yeah.
didn't. Uh, but so it went on for another 2.5 years and 30 hours and blah blah and 13 judges and so on. But I remember actually saying to the judges, like, in the Supreme Court, eventually, I said, "Did this actually happen? Are you telling me this actually happened in our country? Like, you guys are in charge for protecting the Constitution, and this happened." And they're just staring at me blankly,
Hmm.
like. This renders me completely inarticulate. There's this limit to my capacity to describe what I feel about this, because it should not have happened. It could not have happened. In a certain sense, I can't believe it happened. And yet, the facts, the memories, they're all there. And my book is there, which kind of records not so much the events, although the events by definition, but the feelings that I had about the events, the things
Yeah.
that we thought, the involutions of all these things. Because, going back to the journalism thing, there's so many consequences of what's happened to journalism that you wouldn't think about if you hadn't gone through it. For example, I mean, you wouldn't, if this had never happened, and somebody started to prognosticate about the possibility that would happen, and you started talking through what would it mean, you wouldn't have the faintest hope of predicting what has happened. For example, that one of the things is that in the absence of accountability through journalism, there are no consequences for evildoers. None.
Yeah, they can just bloviate. They can set. Well, there are no laws. It's not about laws. It's not illegal to breathe freely.
Yes.
They use words like statutes and rules and regulations. These are not laws. We're governed by laws.
Well, there was a
And
high degree of sleight of hand about that, legally speaking, that they weren't, because they just bluffed that they had done these things. But in fact, they knew that they were, if anybody had really stood against them, if people had just stood against them, they would have fallen within 24 hours. But
yeah,
because they controlled the media, that didn't happen, because people were constantly getting feedback telling them that this was terrible, this was a great deadly disease, and the laws and all. Like, really, one of the things that in Ireland, the the people think that what happened was that you were only allowed to go 2 kilometers from your own house.
yeah, because the virus knows the distance between you and your domicile.
Obviously,
Yeah.
it gives you, a little latitude there to get some fresh
Mhm.
air. But then it's
Mhm.
at the end, you better know where the 2 kilometer ends. Like, there should be lines. There should have been lines, Patrick, telling
Yeah,
you
but the
if
virus is
you,
omniscient. It
you
didn't
lived
need line.
if you lived
Understood.
at number 37 Dunleary Terrace, then your line is here. Right now, you got to go back. That was why. How did
Yeah.
they miss that one? But this is really incredible that they got away with this. But journalism was the great malefactor in this, because the law the law that they said about the 2 kilometers. By the way, the point I was going to make about that is
Mm.
that wasn't even the law. That isn't even what they said. What they said was, you cannot leave your house without a good excuse.
So
Well,
there's the rub. It's
like,
crazy.
sorry, what's a good excuse to leave my house? Because I want to. Because I
Because
want.
yeah, I feel like it.
Yeah. All right. Good luck. In the story, in the debate. But what the police were doing was basically dragging people off then in squad cars and in vans, just to intimidate them. And by and large, some, of course, they would occasionally run into a stupid judge who would convict people, but by and large, these cases were kicked out in the end. I was summoned on one of those spurious cases, charges, and it took about 3 years. But it was trying. I had to hang around courtrooms for several days when wouldn't come up, and then you would come back in a month and whatever. And but this is all intimidation. Intimidation is,
Mhm.
you see,
Mhm.
the culture of everything. This is, and I think this is where it is, Patrick. what this means is that the world as we knew is gone. And now here you would expect me to say unless, but I can't say unless because I'm run out of unlesses, you know? Uh, we've allowed it to pass. We've allowed that world of freedom and of sense of uh, sovereignty and a sense of democratic entitlement. We've allowed that to just dissolve and evaporate. And so the future is really bleak, Patrick. And here I might say unless, but what? Unless what? Unless people stop being stupid, unless people stop listening to these bullies and thugs, unless people grow a pair, unless people grow a brain. Uh, like what do you say to people? Do they understand the implications of this? Do they understand that freedom is not an organic entitlement? That it has to be won, it had to be constructed, and if you demolish it, you have to start again, and that's where we are. Do they understand that? I don't think so. So,
Hmm.
and this is really fundamentally, I mean, in my book, I explain to the best of my ability what this is about. It's about plundering the world. It's about something that was unthinkable in my life, because I grew up in mostly in the 60s plus 60s period when the ethos of youth culture was all about the underdog.
And
Help,
fighting the man.
yeah, sticking it to the man. That was the thing, right? And then suddenly, again, one day in March of 2020, we woke up and the man was now in charge, and everybody thought that's just fine and dandy. I was the only one, or a handful of us were the only ones who said no. We still don't want the man. We still don't want him. Okay, he can live, he can make some money, but he can't control the world because that's what he wants to do. And now he is controlling the world, and his name is Larry Fink. He's the man.
Hmm.
We never knew who the man was, but now we do. And soon we're
Yeah.
going to know a lot more about him and what he
Do you
wants.
get a little bit of cold comfort in going through your book, which starts with a almost minute by minute time clock of events in various countries and the different dominoes that fell and the lack of pushback from people that you'd expect to push back? The fact that social distancing was something that Fauci literally made up whole cloth. It doesn't make any sense. The masks are not protecting you from anything. They are creating hypocrisy in your brain. The jabs were not safe nor effective. It's all coming out now in the wash, and the lawsuits are beginning to go in the other direction, on the direction of sanity. Does that give you some comfort that you've been vindicated by the facts as they've now been revealed? I guess cold comfort, right?
Well,
It's not something you break open champagne about.
well, yeah. I'll put it like this, Pat. It would be giving me cold comfort if I thought it was actually happening. But I'll be honest, Patrick, I don't know that it's happening because I live in Ireland and there's nothing happening. The whole thing is nailed down as firmly as it was on the 1st of April, 2020. You know?
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
definitely there's a sea change here in the U.S.
yeah,
with Robert Kennedy Jr. being a secretary, with the Maha movement, with people
yeah.
who were used to
But
be the underdog. Joseph Lapido is now the Surgeon General of Florida. So there's definitely an American FU pushback, if you will,
I can
probably
see,
more than
I can
Ireland.
feel that. I can feel that, although there are certain ambiguities about it. But nevertheless, even leaving all those aside, you see, look at the stitch up they've done throughout the West in relation to Donald Trump. And let's just say, like, he is what he is. But you know, like in Ireland, we still live in a culture where if you walk into a room making jokes about Donald Trump, everybody's supposed to laugh, and generally they do. And if you don't, everybody look at you and say, "Oh, what's wrong with you? Why are you
Hmm.
laughing?" It's funny, isn't it?
Yeah,
No, everything
the
about
same mimesis, same propaganda.
yeah,
Yeah, not that you have to be a mega Trump fan to see this, but it's Canada, same thing.
yeah.
Canadian.
And see, Bobby Kennedy, the same thing actually. I mean, he gets demonized because there's a few lines which are fed out continuously by the media. He's anti this
Yeah.
and that's enough because those are swear words or spell words as Roger Scruton described them. That there are certain
Mhm.
things certain terms which have power way beyond the weight of the words themselves, and
Yeah.
one and one and one and is one as well. Even though anti-vaxxer in general, I mean, there are people who completely oppose all vaccines, and they make pretty good arguments actually. But most people who in this argument have not been doing that. They have been simply questioning one vaccine, so-called, and it wasn't even a vaccine. It's an entirely different kind of medicine,
It's
and
another irony right there, isn't it?
yeah, and in fact, it's known to be a bioweapon and a very dangerous one for many people, and many people have died unquestionably because of it, and many people have been injured. Uh, Edward Dowd has gone into massive amount of research and gone into. He comes up with figures. He says, based on the American figures, that maybe something between 7 and 15 million people have died worldwide from these vaccines. Now, you know, people say, well, how do you know? Well, if it was a war, people would have lost many more people would have died. Or, well, how many lives were saved? Well, as far as I know, no lives were saved by these injections. None, not one. There's no evidence anywhere that lives were saved by it. It's not possible to prove it, and it is immensely possible to disprove it if you go through the kind of research that has been done by various scientists and by Ed Dowd, whose work is really, I think, tremendous. But this was a confidence trick from the beginning. Again, if you go back and look at the work of Denny Rancourt, the Canadian scientist who did studies of multiple countries, and he found the same pattern, not in every country, but in very many different countries, where you had this extraordinary spike of in April 2020. And yet, virtually in every case, there was no excess death. There were no excess in 2020 at all. Now, how do you riddle that? Well, what do we riddle is that people in April who probably would have died at some point in the year, they died early. And they, as a result of several factors, none of which was, they died because of stress, as for the reason, heartbreak. Stress is one of the primary causes of abuse of sedatives and abuse of ventilators.
Yeah.
And in the round, the suspension of protocols which had worked for these for viruses or for pneumonia or for any kind of illness in hospitals, these protocols were suspended and replaced by a different protocol which did not have the best interests of those people at heart.
Denny Rancourt did put together a lot of good number crunching, as did and still does Ed Dowd. And I want to mention Steve Kirsch as well, Kirsch, going against the grain.
Yes.
I was paying attention in the spring of 2020 to an English funeral director. His name's John O'Looney. I don't know if you remember that name, John O'Looney. Very simple case. And he just took to his camera with a crappy background, just telling the truth as he saw it. And he put the mask on. He was braced for all these bodies. I mean, he's in the undertaker business, so he's waiting for the big boom that never came. It flatlined 2020, but the boom came with the introduction of the jab.
That's right.
And with that came the tremendous taboo among family members to even think in their mind that there's a causal connection between, Uncle Bob's jab and Uncle Bob's myocarditis and crazy, blood clotting patterns. This is all told in the documentary Suddenly.
Yes.
Well, that's pretty good empirical evidence. Even just as a dispassionate juror in a trial, how do you account for that other than the disease was bogus, was overstated, and the cure was the.
Yes, I've interviewed John O'Looney, and
You have?
and I've gone through the evidence with him, and it's quite extraordinary. I mean, because one of the things that he does is he shows what he, in the course of his work, where he has been pulling what appears to be enormous, like strings of clots out of people's arteries after.
Mm-hmm.
It's very, very powerful, very, very disturbing. You see, again, the people, again, you go back to 2020, they told us that they wanted to save every life. And, nobody in excess, they told us that excess would tell the story, which normally they would have, if how serious the pandemic was. Well, the numbers came in at the end of or the beginning of 2021, and there were no excess, and still they wouldn't concede. But then people started to die in great numbers. And what happened then? Well, they all lost their desire to save lives. They didn't seem to be interested in lives being lost anymore. No, no, we've moved on from that. You see, we've moved on now. You know,
Hmm.
we don't talk about that. This is absolutely unforgivable. You know, like this is a crime. The job of journalists is to find out things. There's no excuse for simply deciding on some ideological basis or because the government has told you that COVID is a bad thing and you need to support the government. These are not reasons to betray, in a sense, the vows you took by being a journalist in the first place. Not formal vows in the same way as other professions
Hmm.
take vows, but by virtue of taking up a pen or a pencil or opening up a typewriter or a laptop and to become a journalist and call yourself such, then you have
Yeah.
a sacred responsibility to the public realm. In the same way as a night watchman has over, an orphanage or something. That
Yeah.
nothing that everything must be, his job is to make sure that his charges are safe. That's the job
I,
of me.
I, you're giving me a good idea. I think a journalistic vow should be instituted for Catholic theologians. I remember my alma mater, Franciscan University of Steubenville in Ohio, did a master's degree there. The professors had to sign, it's called the mandatum, and it was a big deal. They wanted to stand up publicly and
Yeah,
essentially commit themselves to never teaching something that's against the magisterium of the Catholic Church.
but
Wonderful. Now,
but
the line is in the sand. So if journalists had that kind of mandatum, then there would be a standard against which you could judge their performance.
I got to tell you though, Patrick, that in my early days in journalism, in the Irish Times, for example, which I wasn't necessarily ideologically at idem with in many respects, but I
Mhm.
did respect the mission of the newspaper to tell the truth. And I have to say that I met some of the finest people that I ever met as journalists and editors in that building.
Mhm.
And you felt it all the time, that there was this sense of ethics. The right thing had to be done at all times. That's now gone. The wrong thing now is the thing that is being done and is being promoted and is being justified. You know, like it I wasn't there in the building while this was going on, so I don't know the mechanics of that. But all I can say is that the exterior uh, 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 impressions that I pick up are shocking. Now you have this phenomenon now beginning to seek, the odd columnist will write a column sort of saying, well, I did feel that it was something slightly not right and early on. Okay, so what did you do? Nothing. What did you say? Nothing. What did you write? Nothing. Okay. Gotcha. Thank you very much. That's it.
When did that switch happen?
Oh, really only in the last year or so.
Mm.
Uh, there were some feints earlier on, but they were false. They were basically, there was something else going on. They were trying to pull some kind of stunt. I'm not quite sure. I picked up on that and I wrote about it in my diaries in my Substack. But uh, like you see, still all this is being protected by the pseudo reality. These journalists can still pretend that they did the right thing because nobody in the major arena and the major crucible of commentary is saying
Mhm.
that. You see, this is the thing. One of the things we wouldn't have anticipated, that if you don't have voices constantly saying what the truth is, then the truth it's not that the truth can survive. It's not just that these journalists stopped telling the truth. It's that they continued working while telling lies. And that then gave the impression, because the people who bought their newspapers, they trusted the masthead and they assumed that nothing had changed. Why should it? Why would it have changed overnight? Well, it did, but they didn't know that. And so they
Mhm.
continue to read the paper and think, well, this is the truth, because what they wrote 3 years ago turned out to be true. So, why would what John Waters says He's no longer working with the Irish Times, so let's not listen to him. Let's listen to the Irish Times. Let's listen to the organ grinder. Well, the organ grinder is a criminal.
Yeah.
That's the answer. So there's so many things in this whole tapestry of untruth that need to be teased out for people, so that before they can begin to understand. A lot of this is in my book. I hope that people will read it, because it's vital that they understand how these things worked and the kinds of tricks that were being played on them, and the way that the effects this had. I mean, there's one of the things, the absence of consequences for power, as I said. Like, again, once upon a time, the ordinary citizen could read a political situation, not because they were told that something was going to happen, that somebody would have to resign, but because they would read the situation and say, "Oh, he's in trouble. He's in trouble." Yeah, that people really don't understand, I think, that the consequences of what's happened for their understanding of reality, in relation to, say, power, in relation to the old world. When a politician behaved badly, if there was a scandal, it might be a sex scandal, it might be financial or whatever, uh, the commentary about it would convey to you that he was on thin ice, and that probably by the weekend he'd be gone. He'd have to resign.
Yeah.
Alistair Campbell, who was Tony Blair's PR guy, used to say that if a politician who gets in trouble in the press can't get himself off the front pages by the weekend, he's toast. And that was true. And that's the accountability process. That's journalists holding power to account.
Yep.
That's not there now. And so the result is that it doesn't matter what somebody is caught out at. What the criteria you have to now apply whenever you hear that maybe something leaks out online about somebody or whatever, the criteria are: is it in the interest of the government that this guy be fired, be got rid of? Yes or no? If no, then he will go on no matter what. You know,
Hmm.
what will happen then is that you will find there will be attacks on those who are trying to out him. We're trying to promote, to advertise the facts of whatever has happened. You know, if there's a scandal, for example, and it's being kind of going under the radar online or whatever, on Twitter or whatever, that will never get into the mainstream. It won't be allowed into the mainstream. But what will get into the mainstream is there will be attacks on the people who are trying to push this information into the public arena.
Yes. Yes. So the same elites that are crafting the narrative and doing the evil can govern with their selective green lights the power of mimesis and use it against people who are truth-telling journalists who are see their vocation as holding power to account.
Yes,
It's just another form of censorship writ large.
that's right. And you get these people, and the way that then, by the same token, politicians continue to bleat about our democratic values while they are trying to suppress those who are exercising those values and seeking to impose them back on the societies that has been stripped of them by the same guys who are bleating about them. I mean, it's quite fantastical, really, when you see it. But again, because the commentary in the media does not reflect reality in this regard, people isn't their attention is not drawn to it. Therefore, it's not happening. And so you have all these kind of surreal kind of, yeah, undertows that are happening in the culture now as a result of the corruption of media. And of course, the corruption of media occurred at this time precisely because they had destroyed their business model by
Hmm.
giving away their product free on the internet. That meant that they were no longer able to sell their newspapers. They were no longer able to charge for their product. And
Yeah. Hmm.
you know, institutions like Facebook, etc., were able to basically pirate the news and use it to make money themselves, and therefore you ended up with what had formerly been the fourth estate suddenly was in a crisis, and
Hmm.
then along came, and they had this great opportunity to survive. To Except all they had to do was to flip their business model from telling the truth to telling lies, and the money flowed in from the government.
Yeah. I keep returning back to the spiritual element that you brought up at the beginning of our conversation.
Mm.
I believe the forces behind are demonic, they're preternatural, and they're aimed at keeping us confused and afraid.
Mm.
Jesus Christ came to kill itself, so there's really no need to be afraid. This is what John Paul II said how many times since October 1978, be not afraid.
Mm.
Scripture reminds us over and over. Why does Scripture remind us so often to not be afraid? Because we're so prone to being afraid. That's
Yes,
why. Good
and because
fathers
fear is
repeat
the greatest fear is the greatest scourge of all.
Yeah,
Because-
I would say doubt's not the opposite of faith. Fear is. And
Yes,
so, if you look at the world scene, and not just, but I look at particularly famously Catholic countries, Ireland, Malta, let's say Quebec, and although it's not a country now, it's almost a country. California, it's like number 7, and if California was a country, it'd be number 7 on the economic scale. California is as Catholic as it comes. Every second city is named after a saint. San Diego, San Jose, Santa Barbara, Santa Monica. The city of Los Angeles is not just the angels, Los Angeles. It's the city of Our Lady of the River Porciúncula, Nuestra Señora de Porciúncula de Los Angeles. So LA is Our Lady's city. The
yes.
capital city of California is the only one in the world named for the Blessed Sacrament, Sacramento, the real presence. So, do you think the devil's in the business of targeting specifically spiritual powerhouses? I think that he is.
I think so.
I don't think it's an accident that
No,
63% of Irishmen. I don't mean 9 lawyers with black robes called the Supreme Court. I mean 63% of the plebiscite on abortion supported the idea that the answer to Ireland's problems is to have fewer Irishmen in the world through.
yes, and we have 50,000 children in the past six years or so, which is the
Mhm,
equivalent of the population of a city in Ireland called Waterford, which is one of our, I suppose, about the fourth or fifth biggest city in the country.
mhm.
Imagine if this city had been wiped out by a bomb. People would
Yeah.
never stop talking about it. It would
Mhm.
never be forgotten. These children are never mentioned because of the abusive language which covers and camouflages their murder. You know, reproductive rights. Murder equals reproductive rights. Well, if you think so. But
Mhm.
you see, yeah, see, in Ireland, there was a series of hammer blows which occurred. This goes right back, in many respects, you could say goes back decades to the softening up of the culture in respect to by feminism and so on. But particularly in the last 15 years, there was a series of attacks on the Irish Constitution and on its fundamental rights, which were fundamentally, you know, rooted in in a religious view of reality. The Irish Constitution begins, the preamble begins in the name of the Most Holy Trinity, and
Mhm.
to whom is all authority, and to whom, as a final end, all matters of men and of states must be referred. Now, I'm blue in the face for years and years, pointing out to people, and particularly in audiences where there will be people who claim to be atheists, that this isn't just an invocation or a prayerful invocation of, the protection of the Holy Trinity. It's something else as well, which is actually irreplaceable, which is that this mechanism whereby the rights of man are handed up to the Holy Trinity for safekeeping means that they're kept out of the reach of tyrants. And
Yeah.
it's not a coincidence that as soon as that came under attack, that the tyrants began to gain confidence. And
Yeah, it's
now,
funny how that worked out.
yeah, it is. And I've been saying this for years. I mean, the abortion referendum of 2018 should never have happened. And I don't mean that in a rhetorical sense. I mean that constitutionally it was completely unlawful because the right of the child was given not by the people, not by the government, not by the state. It was given by the Holy Trinity. And nobody but the Holy Trinity could have voted it down. And I don't think they were any mind to do such a thing. Uh,
Mhm.
we were tricked, the people of Ireland were tricked into believing that by simply removing an article from the Constitution, they could abolish the right that was mentioned within it. But of course, that's
Yeah.
nonsensical. It's
Yeah,
nonsensical.
and that process in, is it 2018,
Hmm.
the referendum
2018.
was used as a kind of fulcrum to do the same thing with the COVID tyranny.
That's
Put
right.
as much hands away from the Holy Trinity into the hands of elected officials,
But
and
Patrick, I,
their way.
I believe there's a deeper level to this, which I felt at the very beginning of this. I felt it immediately after the referendum because the evening of the count, when the announcement was of the result
Mhm.
in Dublin Castle, where the count was happening for the Dublin constituency, there was thousands of young people in the yard with drinks, beer, and so on, toasting and celebrating
Yeah.
the introduction of into
Hmm.
the law of Ireland, the most vulnerable, the most voiceless, the most helpless of all human beings. And I felt watching that, a chill that I said, this cannot be costless. This cannot be without consequences. And
Hmm.
it has been hugely consequential, I believe. I believe that, in a certain sense, we invited some kind of curse down upon our country by allowing that to happen and by allowing an exhibition like that to take
Hmm.
place.
Yeah,
But
it's Romans chapter 1, and God gave them up. God gave them up to their pleasures. You want pleasure and exulting, okay, you can have it. I remember seeing footage of the crowds in the Dublin airport. It was like Conor McGregor just won a fight again, and he was the underdog. People went crazy.
yeah,
It's stomach churning.
yes, and I did feel that very strongly afterwards because in the following year, I was very ill, and I had to go into hospital several times. And I'll be
Hmm.
honest, I used to tremble a little bit, not just on my own behalf, but in the sense that I knew that in this hospital there was a room somewhere where little children were being, and I just said, I shouldn't be here. It's not, something's changed, something's fundamental. I should not come to this place. How could I?
Yeah, yeah,
I couldn't wait to get out of it. And in addition, of course, I had the thing that people who might have been dealing with me, treating me, could themselves be conducting abortions or be involved in them, and might well know that I had opposed this, and might regard
yeah.
me as being judgmental of them, and might, on that account, not be all that cognizant of my own right to life or to survive. You know,
It's not an irrational thought, John. It's
no,
pretty normal.
no, it's not. It's not. And this is the kind of change that occurred in our country as a result of these developments. I think the one was the one which imposed in mutism. But this one, the thing imposed, I believe, a curse, which will not be lifted for a very long time until something enormous happens to our culture and to our spiritual
Well,
existence. Uh,
well,
you know,
I'm
I,
praying for. I think the answer is a massive evangelical revival and a return to the lordship of Jesus Christ, the social kingship of Christ at all levels, including political. Catholics are afraid of this because we've bought the lie that our religion is supposed to be bifurcated. We've redefined the freedom of religion to freedom of worship, and that means you stay within four walls on Sunday. Otherwise, you keep your mouth in the shut position. That's
yeah.
not that's not the role of a Christian in public life. The Mohammedans are certainly raising a glass. They don't have to fire a shot. The Irish will kill themselves off. We can
Well,
just come in and sit down,
yeah.
and it's demographics, baby.
Well, this is something that I think Douglas Murray in his book in The Strange Death of Europe talked about this, and I think there's something towards the end of the book. There's a very stirring passage where he talks about the idea that people now in Europe seem to think that their story has ended, and I feel that, and I feel that it's almost a kind of ideation, that's happening in our society.
Hmm. Hmm.
That we kind of we feel such self-imposed self-hatred
Yeah,
uh, is causing us to basically abolish ourselves, uh,
yeah.
and it doesn't seem to occur to them that means abolishing our children and our grandchildren, the little ones who are running around on the
Hmm.
carpet around us.
Yeah.
What are we thinking of? Like, are we thinking again, you come back to the corruption of our conversation, which is essentially the fourth estate, the media. The death of the media has left us completely helpless. The analogy I've used several times, many times in the last 5 years, is the idea of the walled city, the walled town, the stockade that around the town, and on each corner there's a lookout point, and as it comes dusk in the evening, the elders look out and they walk around, they see the sentries in the lookout posts, and they say everything's good, everything's okay, we can sleep, our children can sleep, our elderly people can sleep. and
Yeah.
and then in the middle of the night, the barbarians descend upon the town and destroy it and kill all the people. And what? Because the sentries went off to the pub or something. Well, that's what that happens. Our sentries basically decided that they were going to put masking tape on their mouths and not
Hmm.
say anything about what they knew to be happening to the world.
Yeah,
In,
it's the three monkeys, right? Hear no
yes,
evil, see no evil, speak
yeah,
no evil.
in order so that the payment, their paychecks would keep coming through at the end of the month. That's
Mhm.
exactly what happened. They sold their people, their peoples and their countries down the river for, as we used to say in Ireland, a pound of hairy bacon.
Yeah, nice, nice. Well, John, as I can with all the loquacious Irish who are my friends, and we could talk each other's ear off all day. I do want to mention the title of the book again: "The Abolition of Reality: A First Draft of the End of History." It's available at fine bookstores, Amazon. Yes.
No, it's Amazon, not at fine bookstores, because in Ireland anyway, it's basically been shadow banned. This has happened to my
Ah,
last
hmm.
couple of books, whereby the word is out that actually, I'll just tell you a funny little anecdote to kind of make you smile.
Hmm.
A friend of mine went into a library in the southeast of the country there recently, and asked if the librarian at the counter, "Do you have John Walter's book, The Abolition of Reality?" And the librarian snorted. No, no, we don't have that. No, we don't have that.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, thank you, my friend said. And he went towards the door. And at the door, he turned around and he went back to the same librarian. And he says, "By any chance, sir," he says, "would you have a copy of Mein Kampf?"
Hmm.
"Oh, yes, it's over there."
Yeah. How many sets of rules are there? Two, at least.
So
All right.
that's Ireland for you now, Ireland 2025, and getting
Good.
worse.
Well, it's the compilation of the Substack, which you're still active on. Substack. What's the? Give me the correct
Oh,
URL
yeah,
so I can
sorry,
search this.
yeah, sorry. It's John Waters Unchained.
Mhm.
Uh, johnwaters.substack.com is the link that'll get you there. And uh, I'm on Twitter, but don't ignore that, because I hate Twitter and I don't do anything anymore because I'm shadow banned anyway there as well. Elon Musk is not, has never been to Ireland as far as I know, and he doesn't know what happens there, and he
Mhm.
seems not to care either. But so that's if people want to get me, that's where they'll get me.
Great. Well, it's an important recent history, and it's a good antidote to being forearmed about the next stunt that the elites try to pull. John Waters, always a pleasure. Thanks for the book, and I hope it gets what it deserves, a wide readership. We'll talk again, okay?
Thank you very much, Patrick.
All right. This is the Patrick Coffin Show. Be a saint. What else is there?